The celestial Accord station hung in space like a jewel, orbiting a neutron star that pulsed with ancient light. Inside its massive diplomatic chamber, representatives from 47 species gathered in their designated sections. The room itself was a marvel of engineering, with atmospheric zones customized for each delegation. Some areas glowed with heat for the silicon-based Velthrine. Others churned with methane clouds for the Korthax. People reporting, and in 1 week Zomses, humans occupied a modest corner with simple Earth-standard atmosphere. Ambassador Jinseo Park adjusted her translation device and watched the proceedings with growing frustration. She had been humanity's representative for only 3 months, and every session felt like watching paint dry. Except, paint drying actually accomplished something. The current speaker, a Velthrine Primarch whose crystalline body reflected light in dizzying patterns, was discussing the blight situation. 3 colony worlds were dying. Crops withered, water sources turned toxic. Millions of civilians were sick, and thousands had already died. The Primarch spoke for 20 minutes, without saying anything meaningful. "We must pursue alternative, investigative frameworks," the Primarch announced, its voice chiming like wind through glass. "A multifaceted approach, considering all stakeholder interests, remains paramount." Jin Seo's human colleague, Ambassador Chen, sat beside her. He was 70 years old and had served in galactic diplomacy for 30 years. He noticed her expression and whispered, Don't what?" Jinseo whispered back. "Whatever you're thinking. That look means trouble." She wanted to stand up and scream. 3 worlds were dying, and these politicians were discussing stakeholder interests. But she had learned, painfully, that direct speech was considered barbaric here. The galaxy's advanced civilizations prided themselves on sophisticated communication. They used layers of meaning, careful phrasing, and diplomatic codes that took years to master. The Korthax trade minister spoke next. The reptilian creature's scales gleamed under the chamber lights. "The consortium acknowledges concern regarding the unfortunate agricultural anomalies. We propose continued dialogue to achieve consensus on appropriate responsive measures." More nothing. Dressed up as something, Jinseo had read the real reports, the classified ones. Human scientists had traced the blight to industrial contamination. Illegal mining operations were poisoning entire ecosystems. The evidence was clear, but nobody would say it out loud. The Xylene Observer floated in its containment field, a being of pure energy that supposedly remained neutral in all council matters. It spoke in harmonics that the translation devices rendered as a soothing voice. The collective supports measured consideration. Hasty action serves no purpose. Wisdom requires patience. Jinseo checked her datapad. The blight had spread to 42 settlements in the past week alone. Patience was killing people. The session dragged on for 4 more hours. Speaker after speaker used elaborate phrases that meant nothing. Pursuing comprehensive analysis protocols, engaging multilateral consultation frameworks, developing integrated response strategies. Not one person said what everyone knew. The mining operations were illegal. The contamination was deliberate. And the species running those operations had enough political power to avoid consequences. Finally, the session ended. The council president, an ancient Morvine whose species had founded the galactic government 8,000 years ago, announced the next meeting in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. While people died, Jinseo walked back to the human delegation's quarters with Chen. The corridors of Celestial Accord Station bustled with diplomatic staff from dozens of species. Some nodded respectfully to the humans. Others ignored them. Humanity was new here. Barely 80 years since first contact. They were still learning how things worked. "You're angry," Chen observed. 3 worlds, Ambassador. Millions of people. I know. But you can't just stand up and say what you're thinking. That's not how it works here. Maybe it should be. Chen stopped walking. He turned to face her with serious eyes. "Jinseo, listen to me. These species have been doing diplomacy for thousands of years. They've developed these protocols for good reasons. Direct confrontation between species with different biologies, different value systems, different ways of thinking, it leads to war. End quote. So instead they let people die? They work toward solutions carefully. Preserving relationships matters. Jin Seo wanted to argue, but she respected Chen too much. He had taught her everything about galactic politics. He had fought for humanity's seat at this table. She swallowed her frustration. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept reviewing the data. The contamination patterns. The mining operation logs that human intelligence had obtained. The financial records showing which council members profited from similar operations across the galaxy. The truth was simple. The Korthax Consortium ran illegal mining operations in the Tertian Belt. Their industrial runoff caused the blight. The Xylene Collective knew about it for 7 months and concealed evidence because they were silent partners in the profits. The Velthrine Primarchy operated 34 similar mining sites in other systems and wanted no attention on the practice. Everyone knew. Nobody would say it. Jin Seo thought about her grandmother, who had survived the soul floods of 2089. She used to say that politeness was wonderful until it killed you. Then it was just cowardice with good manners. A message arrived on her datapad. Emergency session called. A fourth world, reported the Blight. This one was a Velthrine colony. Population, 2 billion. Jinso smiled grimly. Now it mattered. Now that it affected the powerful, there would be urgent action. She wondered if the Primarch would still use such careful language when discussing its own people dying. She dressed in her formal diplomatic attire. Simple by galactic standards. Just a tailored suit in dark blue. No environmental suit needed. No exotic adaptations. Humans were remarkably average in galactic terms. Average biology, average technology, average everything. Except for one thing. Humans had a cultural blind spot that other species found baffling. They struggled to maintain polite lies when the truth seemed obvious. It made them seem naive, childlike, unsophisticated. Jinso checked her reflection. She looked tired. 3 months of careful diplomacy, of learning to speak in circles, of saying nothing important, as eloquently as possible. She thought about the people dying on 4 worlds. She thought about her grandmother's words. She thought about the classified reports sitting in her secure files. Then she made a decision that would change galactic diplomacy forever. She would tell the truth. The emergency session convened 6 hours after the Velthrine colony reported the blight. The council chamber filled rapidly with representatives who looked far more urgent than usual. Jin Seo noticed the difference immediately. When the dying worlds belonged to smaller, less powerful species, sessions were scheduled weeks apart. Now that Velthrine civilians faced the same threat, everyone suddenly had time. The Primarch entered the chamber with unusual speed. Its crystalline structure pulsed with agitated colors, shifting from blue to red to orange. In Velthrine communication, this indicated severe distress. The being that had spoken so carefully about stakeholder interests now radiated panic. The council must act immediately, the Primarch announced, its voice chiming with sharp, discordant notes. My people face extinction. This demands urgent intervention. Jin Seo watched several other delegates exchange glances. The Korthax trade minister's scales rippled, a nervous gesture. The Xylene observer dimmed slightly, which human analysts had learned meant discomfort. Ambassador Chen leaned toward Jin Seo. They're going to push through emergency measures now. Watch. He was right. The Primarch proposed immediate quarantine protocols, extensive scientific investigation, and unlimited resources for evacuation planning. All the things that could have saved lives on the other 3 worlds, if they had been implemented months ago. Other council members began their responses. Despite the emergency, they still used the same elaborate diplomatic language. The Morvine president spoke of accelerated timeline considerations, within appropriate framework parameters. The Threlkin representative discussed expedited consensus-building methodologies. More beautiful words that meant nothing. Jin-So felt something cold settle in her stomach. These people would act now because the Velthrine had power, but they would still avoid saying what actually happened. They would investigate and discuss and analyze, all while pretending nobody knew the cause. She looked at her datapad. Human intelligence had updated the reports overnight. The evidence was even clearer now. The contamination signature matched Korthak's industrial processes exactly. The Xylene had actively suppressed 3 separate scientific studies that would have revealed the connection. The Velthrine's own illegal operations in other systems used identical methods. Everyone in this chamber knew. They just refused to say it. The Primarch finished its emergency proposal and yielded the floor. The council president began calling on speakers in order of seniority. The list would eventually reach humanity, but probably not for another hour. Jin-So made a decision. She stood up. The chamber fell silent. Standing during another delegate's speaking time violated protocol. Chen grabbed her arm, but she gently pulled away. Her translation device activated, broadcasting her words to every species in their own language. Council President, I request permission to speak. The ancient Morvine turned its enormous eyes toward her. The human delegation is not yet recognized in the speaking order. I understand. I'm requesting emergency recognition. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Emergency recognition was reserved for immediate threats to galactic security. Using it for diplomatic procedure violations was unprecedented. On what grounds? The president asked. On the grounds that this council is wasting time while people die, and I know why. More murmurs. Louder now. Chen had his face in his hands. The president considered for a long moment. Jin-So took a breath. She had practiced careful diplomatic language for months. She had learned to phrase everything in circles, to imply without stating, to suggest without claiming. She abandoned all of it. The blight affecting 4 worlds originated from Korthak's trade consortium, illegal mining operations in the Tertian Belt. Specifically, operations code-named Prosperity Wells, Gamma, through Omega. The contamination is industrial runoff from rare element extraction processes. The Xylene Collective has known this for 7 months and concealed evidence because they're silent partners receiving 30% of the profits. The Velthrine Primarchy operates 34 similar illegal mining operations in other systems and wanted to avoid attention on the practice. The silence was absolute. Jin-So continued, her voice steady. Human intelligence has documented all of this. Operation codes, profit distributions, casualty projections that were deliberately suppressed. The contamination is now affecting Velthrine colony world Treshva, because the underground aquifers in that region connect to the Tertian Belt through fault lines your own geologists mapped 3 years ago. She pulled up data on the main chamber display. Charts appeared. Mining operation logs, financial transfers, contamination spread patterns. Everything. Current death toll across all 4 worlds is 14.3 million. Projected deaths if we continue current response timeline will reach 100 million within 6 months. We can evacuate approximately 70% of affected populations if we start in 6 hours. The Korthak's delegation had gone completely still. Their species had a defensive reflex that caused total paralysis when confronted with predators. They were experiencing it now. The Xylene observer had dimmed to almost nothing, its energy field barely visible. The Velthrine Primarch's crystalline structure had stopped pulsing entirely. Not a single color shift. Not a single chime of sound. Jin-So looked at each major delegation in turn. Every senior council member knew some or all of this information. The evidence has been available for months. We've spent those months discussing stakeholder interests and multifaceted approaches, while millions died. She paused, then delivered her final statement. We can continue pretending we don't know what caused this. We can schedule more sessions to discuss investigation frameworks, and consensus-building methodologies. We can protect the reputations and profit margins of the species responsible. Or we can evacuate 4 worlds starting in 6 hours and actually save the people we're supposed to represent. Choose. Jinso sat down. The silence extended. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Ambassador Chen stared at her with an expression somewhere between horror and awe. Then, the chamber erupted into chaos. The chaos was unlike anything Jinseo had expected. She had anticipated anger, accusations, denials. Instead, the chamber descended into confusion. Delegates from multiple species started speaking simultaneously, not in fury but in apparent bewilderment. The Morvine president tried to restore order, but even its ancient authority seemed inadequate. Junior diplomats from various delegations were frantically consulting their seniors. Some species' translation devices seemed to be malfunctioning, asking for clarification on Jinseo's statements, as if the words themselves were incomprehensible. Ambassador Chen finally spoke, his voice tight. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" "I told the truth. You destroyed 40,000 years of diplomatic protocol." "Good." A Threlkin junior diplomat suddenly stood. The Threlkin were small, mammalian creatures whose species held minimal council power. The junior diplomat's voice trembled. "The human representative speaks accurately. My government has evidence of similar Korthax operations in Sector 47. We were ordered not to present it to avoid trade relationship complications." A senior Threlkin delegate tried to pull the junior one down, but others were standing now. A Morvine scientist activated a display. 3 separate research teams submitted reports on contamination signatures matching Korthax industrial processes. All 3 were classified and suppressed. "This is highly irregular." The Korthax trade minister finally found its voice. "These accusations lack proper evidentiary protocols." 1. Ago. The Jinseo stood again. "The evidence is now in the Council's public archive. I uploaded it before this session. Every citizen of every species can access it." The chamber went silent again. Public archive meant the information was permanent and accessible across the galaxy. There was no way to suppress it now. The Velthrine Primarch's crystalline structure began pulsing again, but the colors were different. Not distress now, fury. The human delegate has committed cultural warfare. This form of direct accusation is designed to destroy our diplomatic framework. Your diplomatic framework was designed to hide crimes. Jinso replied calmly. It was designed to prevent war. The Primarch's voice rose to a painful chime. Direct confrontation between species leads to conflict. We learned this lesson in blood thousands of years before your species discovered fire. And how many died while you maintained peace through lies? The question hung in the air. No one answered. Ambassador Chen stood beside Jinseo. She was surprised to see him supporting her physically, even if he disagreed. "Council, President. The human delegation requests a recess to consult with our government." "Denied," said a new voice. The Xylene observer brightened suddenly, its energy field crackling with unusual intensity. "The human delegate has violated the most fundamental principle of council membership: trust. She has poisoned the ability of species to communicate in good faith. This cannot stand." Within an hour, the major powers had convened an emergency tribunal. Jinseo was formally charged with catastrophic breach of diplomatic protocol and cultural warfare. The tribunal would determine if humanity should be expelled from the council entirely. The human delegation's quarters became a storm of activity. Chen was on constant communication with Earth. Other human diplomats reviewed precedents and procedures. Everyone agreed Jinseo had destroyed decades of careful relationship building. "They're going to make an example of you," Chen said quietly. "Maybe of all of us." "I know. Was it worth it?" Jinseo pulled up the casualty reports on her screen. 14 million dead. She thought about the evacuation plans that could have been implemented months ago. She thought about the comfortable lies that preserved everyone's dignity while children died. "Yes," she said simply, But doubt crept in during the night. Had she made things worse? The tribunal could expel humanity from the council. Earth's position in galactic politics was already weak. What if her actions led to humanity's isolation? What if refusing to play by their rules meant humans lost access to galactic trade, technology, protection? She barely slept. When morning came, she discovered something unexpected. News of the tribunal had spread across the galaxy. And the reaction wasn't what the council expected. On 17 different worlds, civilian populations were protesting, not against Jinseo, but against their own governments. Citizens who had long suspected corruption now had proof. The phrase, "speak like humans," appeared in demonstrations across multiple species. A Threlkin news network ran a story titled, "What Humans Risk by Telling Truth." It pointed out that humanity had nothing to gain and everything to lose by exposing the powerful. The story went viral across galactic networks. Chen showed Jinseo the reports. "You've started something. I'm not sure what, but something big." The tribunal convened in a smaller chamber. 3 judges presided: a Velthrine elder, a Korthax legal expert, and surprisingly, a Vreshka philosopher. The Vreshka were amphibious beings known for their ethical frameworks. Their presence suggested this was about more than just diplomatic procedure. The prosecution spent hours detailing Jinseo's violations. They brought expert witnesses who explained how galactic civilization required social lubricants, careful phrasing, and plausible deniability to function. One historian testified that direct truth-telling between species had caused 3 major wars in ancient history. The human delegate engaged in communication warfare, the prosecutor argued. She weaponized information to force confrontations our societies cannot process. This is violence, disguised as honesty. Jinseo was given the opportunity to defend herself. She stood before the tribunal. "I don't deny the charges. I broke your protocols deliberately. I destroyed trust between liars. I forced confrontations you weren't ready for." Everything the prosecution said is accurate. The Velthrine judge's structure pulsed with satisfaction. The case seemed closed. Then Jinseo continued. "But let me tell you what else I did. I stopped allowing 14 million deaths to be covered up as unfortunate agricultural anomalies. I ended your comfortable system where powerful species profit, while weaker ones suffer in silence. I reminded everyone that beneath all your sophisticated language, you're still making choices about who lives and who dies." She pulled up images on the display. Children from multiple species, victims of the blight. These are the people your diplomatic protocols sacrificed for stakeholder interests. The tribunal chamber remained silent as the images cycled through. Children with wasting diseases. Farmers standing in poisoned fields. Medical facilities overwhelmed with patients. The faces were alien, but suffering was universal. Even across species, pain looked the same. The Korthax judge finally spoke. "Suffering exists throughout the galaxy. Diplomacy is how we minimize it through cooperation and compromise." "Diplomacy is how you hide it," Jinseo replied. "You minimize discomfort for yourselves by making it invisible. As long as the casualties happen far away to species without council power, you can maintain your comfortable protocols." The Velthrine judge's crystalline structure flickered with agitation. "You speak as if we lack compassion. Our species has existed for 40,000 years. We have seen horrors your young species cannot imagine. We developed these protocols to prevent worse suffering. Did you?" Jinseo challenged. "Or, did you develop them to prevent accountability?" The third judge, the Vreshka philosopher, had been silent until now. It spoke in a deep, resonant voice that required no translation device. Vreshka vocal cords could produce sounds that most species understood intuitively. "Human delegate, answer this question truthfully. What did your species risk by exposing this corruption?" Jinseo considered. "Everything. Our council membership, our trade agreements, our access to galactic technology, and protection. Our reputation as a species capable of civilized behavior. Why accept such risk? Because the alternative was participating in mass murder through silence. The Vreshka judge's large eyes blinked slowly. You chose moral integrity over practical benefit. This is unusual in galactic politics. Maybe that's the problem with galactic politics. The tribunal recessed for deliberation. Jin Seo returned to the human quarters where Chen and the others waited. The mood was grim. Most expected harsh judgment. Humanity's brief time in galactic civilization might end today. But outside the diplomatic chambers, something else was happening. The protests were growing. On 43 worlds now, citizens demonstrated for government transparency. Small species who had suffered similar exploitation began sharing their own evidence. A massive data leak started, with whistleblowers from multiple governments releasing classified information. The galactic information networks were overwhelmed. Decades of carefully hidden corruption was spilling into public view. The system the Council had built, where convenient lies maintained stability, was collapsing under the weight of truth. A Morvene analyst appeared on every major news network. The Council has lost control of the narrative. Citizens across the galaxy are demanding what they call human standard communication. Direct truth, regardless of diplomatic consequences. Earth's government sent a message to Chen. They had made a decision. They would not apologize for Jin Seo's actions. They would not beg the Council for leniency. If humanity was expelled, they would accept it. Some principles mattered more than galactic membership. Chen showed the message to Jin Seo. She felt tears forming. She had expected her own government to sacrifice her for practical politics. Instead, they chose to support her. We're not very good at galactic diplomacy, Chen said quietly. Maybe we never will be. But apparently, we're good at something else. The tribunal reconvened after 6 hours. The 3 judges looked exhausted. The Vreshka spoke first. This tribunal has debated a fundamental question. Is truth a weapon? Can honesty be violence? Can exposure of wrongdoing constitute warfare? The chamber held its breath. We find that it can. The human delegate deliberately disrupted diplomatic processes. She forced confrontations, designed to cause political damage. She weaponized information to destroy reputations and relationships. Jin Seo felt her stomach sink. Here came the expulsion. However, the Vreshka continued, we also find that the protocols she disrupted were themselves corrupt. The diplomatic processes she disturbed were designed to enable exploitation. The reputations she destroyed deserved destruction. The other 2 judges looked uncomfortable but said nothing. This tribunal issues a formal censure against Ambassador Jin Seo Park. She has violated diplomatic protocols and cannot continue in her current role. However, we issue no sanctions against humanity as a species. The human delegates' actions, while disruptive, were morally justified, even if procedurally inappropriate. It was the most carefully worded non-decision Jin Seo had ever heard. She was punished, but not really. Humanity was judged, but not penalized. The tribunal had tried to split the difference. The Vreshka wasn't finished. The Council must also acknowledge that this crisis revealed systemic failures in our governance. We have allowed diplomatic courtesy to become a shield for wrongdoing. We have prioritized comfortable relationships over uncomfortable truths. This must change. The judge's eyes fixed on Jin Seo. Young species, you have reminded us of something we forgot long ago. Truth has power. Not because it is a weapon, but because it is a foundation. You can build on truth. You cannot build on lies, no matter how polite those lies may be. The tribunal adjourned. Jin Seo was censured, but not expelled. Humanity maintained council membership. It felt like losing and winning simultaneously. Chen put a hand on her shoulder. Well, you survived. Barely. What happens now? Now? He smiled slightly. Now you've changed everything. The galaxy will never work quite the same way again. That evening, Jinseo received an official communication from Earth's government. They offered her a new position, Special Representative for Transparent Relations. Her job would be to continue doing exactly what she had done, but now officially sanctioned. Other species began creating similar positions, unable to ignore public demand for honest communication. The galaxy was adapting, slowly and reluctantly, to the idea that maybe diplomatic lies weren't the only way to prevent war. Jinseo sat in her quarters, looking at the offer. She thought about her grandmother's words. Politeness is wonderful until it kills you. She accepted the position. 6 months passed. The galaxy looked different now, though the changes were subtle to those who didn't know where to look. The celestial Accord station still orbited its neutron star. The council chamber still hosted 47 species. But the nature of the conversations had shifted. Jinseo walked through the corridors with less attention than before. When she first arrived, humans were curiosities. Then, she became infamous. Now, she was simply part of the landscape. Some delegates nodded respectfully. Others avoided eye contact. That was fine. Her new office was smaller than the main delegation quarters, located in a section of the station reserved for special representatives. The title sounded impressive, but carried little formal authority. She wasn't an ambassador anymore. She was something new. Something the galaxy was still figuring out how to handle. The evacuation of the 4 blighted worlds had been completed within 2 months. Human ships did most of the heavy lifting, supported by smaller species who didn't have council clout, but had desire to help. The major powers contributed eventually, once public pressure made refusal politically impossible. 72% of the affected populations survived. 28% didn't. Jinseo kept those numbers on her desk. Not as a celebration, but as a reminder. 28% was better than 100%. But each decimal point represented actual lives that diplomatic delays had cost. The Korthax Trade Consortium faced massive penalties and restrictions. Their illegal mining operations across the galaxy were shut down. The Xylene Collective lost their observer status and wouldn't regain it for at least a decade. The Velthrine Primarchy quietly closed their similar operations, avoiding public exposure through behind-the-scenes negotiations. Real reforms were happening, but slowly. The Council established new transparency protocols. Financial dealings had to be disclosed. Scientific studies couldn't be suppressed without public justification. Whistleblowers received protection instead of punishment. It wasn't revolutionary. It was barely adequate. But it was movement in the right direction. Jinseo's current meeting was with a young delegate from the Phoenix Coalition, an insectoid species from the Outer Rim. The delegate, whose name translated roughly as "clicking bright wing," had requested a private consultation. My government wants to expose corruption in the Terthian sector, Clicking Bright Wing explained, its mandibles moving rapidly with anxiety. But we fear retaliation. Your species is strong enough to survive making enemies. We are not. Jinseo had heard variations of this concern from multiple smaller species. They wanted honesty, but couldn't afford the political cost. Start smaller, she advised. Don't try to expose everything at once. Pick one clear violation, document it thoroughly, and present it through official channels. Build credibility gradually. But your approach was to expose everything immediately. My approach almost got humanity expelled from the council. The young delegate seemed disappointed. We hoped you would help us be revolutionary. Jinseo smiled. Revolution sounds exciting, but it's just rapid change. Sometimes slow change is more sustainable. The goal isn't to destroy the system. It's to make the system work honestly. After Clicking Brightwing left, Jinseo reviewed her schedule. 3 more consultations today. A meeting with human intelligence about new evidence of labor exploitation. A presentation to junior diplomats about transparent communication techniques. Every day brought similar work. Her door chimed. The visitor was unexpected. The Vreshka judge. From her tribunal. Special Representative Park. May I enter? Of course. Honored Judge, the amphibious being moved into the room with surprising grace despite its bulk. It settled into a specialized chair designed for aquatic species. I wanted to speak with you informally, not as a judge, but as an observer of history. Jinseo waited. My species has a philosophical tradition spanning 60,000 years. We have teachings about cycles. Civilizations build systems. Those systems calcify, and eventually, something breaks them open, so growth can resume. You think that's what I did? Broke open a calcified system? I think you were the hammer that struck the crack. But cracks were already there. Your species simply provided the impact. The Vreshka's large eyes studied her carefully. My people have a prophecy, though we prefer to call it a pattern observation. It speaks of disruptors who would break the cycle of comfortable corruption. We thought it might be the Korthax when they first achieved spaceflight, then the Xylene when they developed energy consciousness. We were wrong both times. And now you think it's humans? I think you demonstrated something important. Not superiority, but difference. Your species has a cultural trait that others find baffling. You struggle to maintain polite lies when truth seems obvious. This makes you seem naive. We are naive. We've been in the galaxy for 80 years. You've been here for 60,000. Naivety and wisdom are not opposites. Sometimes innocence sees clearly, because it hasn't learned what to ignore. The judge shifted, creating small ripples in its moisture field. I came to tell you something, Special Representative. Your actions were more significant than you realize. Not because you exposed corruption, but because you demonstrated an alternative. You showed the galaxy that directness isn't barbarism. It's courage that we had lost. Jinseo felt the weight of those words. I didn't feel courageous. I felt angry and frustrated. Courage rarely feels like courage from inside. It usually feels like doing what must be done despite cost. After the judge left, Jinseo sat in silence for a while. She thought about the past 6 months. The chaos, the reforms, the slow grinding progress toward a more honest galaxy. A message arrived. The Threlkin government had successfully prosecuted corruption charges in their sector, using evidence presented through new transparency protocols. It was a small victory, but real. Another message. A scientific journal announced new open access policies. Research could no longer be suppressed for political convenience. Researchers from multiple species praised the decision. Small things. Each one, insignificant, alone. Together, they suggested something larger, shifting. Jinseo looked out her viewport at the stars. Somewhere, out there, on hundreds of worlds, species were conducting their politics a little differently than before. Not completely, honestly. Not yet. Old habits died slowly across galactic civilization. But the door was open now. The possibility of different ways existed. Her communications system activated. Ambassador Chen, calling from Earth. How's the galaxy's most controversial diplomat? He asked. Tired. You? Retired officially as of yesterday. Someone younger needed the position. You'll be missed. Maybe. But I'm proud of what we accomplished. Not just you. All of us. We showed the galaxy that humans can play by different rules. After the call ended, Jinseo returned to her viewport. A ship was departing the station, probably carrying delegates back to their home worlds. They would return to their governments, their societies, their familiar patterns. But now those patterns had cracks in them. Light was getting through. She remembered standing in the council chamber 6 months ago, delivering the truth that everyone knew, but nobody would speak. She remembered the frozen silence, the shock on alien faces that had forgotten what unvarnished honesty sounded like. The galaxy hadn't transformed overnight. Evil hadn't been defeated. Corruption still existed. But something fundamental had shifted. The assumption that truth must be hidden for civilization to function had been challenged. And enough people across enough species had decided that maybe, just maybe, the humans were right. Maybe honesty, however uncomfortable, was the only foundation that lasted. Jinsei smiled slightly and returned to her desk. Tomorrow would bring more consultations, more requests for guidance, more species trying to figure out how to speak truth without destroying everything they had built. It was slow work. Frustrating work. Important work. The kind of work humans seemed surprisingly good at, despite being the galaxy's newest members. Or perhaps because of it. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please, double-check responses.